Have you ever been laid off?
I have not. Have you been laid off?
Twice.
Twice?
Twice. I
Oh my
took one for
God.
you.
The time where I learned the most, and it was probably the time in my career that it was the most rewarding. This is what we're seeing versus this is what you'd like. But there's definitely a generational divide, I would say.
Oh, interesting.
So the older generations don't don't really understand.
If I was a candidate and I wanted to move to New York,
Everyone's like, it's the best place ever. Oh my God, it's amazing. I grew up here, so I kind of have a different feeling. So I always want to be honest with anyone that's thinking they want to move to New York. I say, getting a visa in the US is really hard. The candidate could be entered into a lottery. I think about like 5% or 10% from the lottery get in.
if you had younger Mel in front of you, what would you tell her?
I'd say probably the first thing that I would say is
In my team, I've got a nice mixture of millennials and Jay Z, Jay Z, Gen Z.
Jay-Z.
Jay-Z. I wish I had Jay Z.
So maybe if tech companies adopt that in the next 5, 10 years, fashion will do it in 20. I think it's always important to be transparent because
I'm so happy that you explain it to candidates as well, that taking a counteroffer is never a good idea.
the counter offer and the stats for a counter offer, they're so bad. And I always explain it, but they never listen.
You had to resign, find a new job, interview somewhere else for the company to appreciate you.
I often find myself also explaining it to hiring managers or to higher ups in the company where sometimes the counter offer is not the move because the
No.
person's just going to leave. If someone's going to leave, they're going to leave. Unfortunately, hiring managers will always place the blame on the recruiter.
The best hiring managers are the ones that give you, and yeah, let's not talk about the worst ones. They just sell them the dream, like, I'll find you the right candidate. Don't worry,
Yeah.
leave it with me. Fashion designer is this title that a lot of young people aspire to be. They follow a lot of fashion TikTokers and think, wow, I want to live like that. But it's high stress, isn't it?
It is. I think there are different areas in the industry. So
And then you have a director telling you what to do, essentially.
definitely.
And you have 100 applicants. I want to stand out. How do I stand out to you? What do you look for?
I would say the first thing I'm looking for in a portfolio is,
So, Mel, why recruitment?
well, I kind of fell into recruitment, which I think a lot of people do. I had graduated school in 2012, and there were very few jobs out there in New York, and I kind of was recruited to be a recruiter. And I really took to it pretty easily and absolutely loved it. Um, and I've just stuck with it and really have seen my skills grow and seen the industry change. And it really has been incredible. But it really was something that I had no idea existed until I started doing it.
Has it been 15 years since you've been
It has
doing it?
been, it was 2012, so I'm nearing 12 years.
Wow. And
It's a
you
long
do
time.
recruitment and HR.
I do. Up until this position that I'm currently in, I only did recruitment. And then I kind of fell into handling the HR.
Wow. How, for those that are listening and are doing either HR or recruitment, for example, like myself, I find it crazy to combine the two worlds together and be a HR professional and recruitment at the same time. How are you finding it?
I love it. They do go really, really hand in hand, but it is something where I kind of have to turn off the recruiter brain to turn on the HR brain and vice versa. But it does definitely help with the overall recruitment, I would say, because now I have a good understanding of why someone exited a role or what's going on in the business. So I just feel that I have a bit more information than I had had previously. But it is definitely something where you have to turn one on to turn the other on.
You don't have to wait for responses as well. You are an entire department.
Yes, exactly.
You're the entire life cycle. So maybe for those, we kind of jumped in a bit quickly, but maybe for those that don't know you and are listening to the podcast, Mel, are you able to give us a brief introduction about yourself? So you mentioned about 2012, but more about what kind of industries you've been working in and what you've enjoyed so far in recruitment?
Absolutely. Yes. So, I started in 2012. I actually was at a recruiting agency doing temp, doing what they call office support at that company. So it was temp for like admins and receptionists and customer service and like some low level accounting. And then from there, I was actually recruited to leave there to go into a fashion agency. So I was recruited to go in and start their first ever freelance and temporary department at a company called SBH Fashion. And there I really kind of learned by myself from the ground up. I never knew anything about fashion. I came in and was like, what does a good portfolio look like? What is product development? What is production? Really came in and learned it from the ground up. There I was kind of doing a little bit of HR too, because I was doing all the payroll for my temps, all the benefits for my temps. It was like crazy. A lot of employee relations for temps, as I'm sure you could imagine.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
then from there, I went back to my first employer, and I ended up actually on the healthcare team. And it was just something they had asked me to move over to, and I actually really enjoyed it. And I started on that team about a year before the COVID pandemic. So I had a year to learn all about nurses and what they do in the different areas. And then I just continued doing it. Throughout the whole pandemic, it was crazy. I was recruiting 7 days a week. It was temp and permanent. So it was absolutely crazy. And the whole time I was
Wow.
there, I knew that I wanted to be in house. Agency life is really tough.
Hmm.
Um, and I knew as I was getting older, those types of hours and the working on weekends, it wasn't really going to work. So I went to a company called G3, which is a fashion company. So I went back to my
Yeah.
fashion roots, and they have brands like DKNY and Karl Lagerfeld and Calvin Klein and Tommy Hilfiger. So I was thrown into a company that had about 30 brands, which really I was prepared for it because I came from an agency where I was easily working with that many clients at any given time. And there I was recruiting on crazy amounts of roles. They had a very high
Wow.
turnover and there were a lot of changes. So always recruiting. And then from there, I was recruited out to come to ESPRIT. Um,
Wow.
and I was the first ever US HR and recruiting person that they've had. So it was really creating processes, working with what was already there, and building this department from the ground up, and
Yeah.
teaching hiring managers what they're looking for and explaining the market and what was out
Yeah.
there. It really is, it's exciting and it's an ever changing environment.
For those that are listening, me and Mel work together at our current company. This is how we know each other. But that's so interesting. I just want to go back to the COVID bit because for me, maybe it's Europe. I was I was really quiet. I wasn't doing much. There was a lot of hiring freezes. Managers were terrified to recruit. And I was working in an agency. It was really painful at that time. But I guess the industry you're working in was super busy. There was a lot of demand for what you were doing.
Yeah, it was just because of the industry. I had all my other recruiter friends were kind of bored, and I was like, I wish I was bored. So it was definitely different. It was absolutely crazy, especially because New York was the first major city that was really hit. So the New York nursing jobs and the travel nursing jobs that I was dealing with, they were, it was unprecedented. We had never seen anything like it and didn't really understand what it meant and understood what was actually happening. So it was a really crazy, crazy time, but it was probably the time where I learned the most. And it was probably the time in my career that it was the most rewarding because you're actually recruiting
Yeah,
to really help like thousands and thousands of people.
that's amazing. And
It
now
was
fashion.
now
So,
fashion.
how are you finding the fashion industry? For me, it's competitive. There can be some egos involved.
Absolutely. Working with creatives is really interesting, which I have definitely been doing for a long time, but in I think that working with creatives and setting expectations is the hardest. If
Mm,
someone has the creative mindset versus like the business mindset, they have trouble understanding where the other one is. Um, so that would probably be the main change, I'd say, dealing with the creatives, and also really being able to hold the hands of the hiring managers and
Yeah.
say, this is what we're seeing versus this is what you'd like. Totally understand. This is what we're seeing, and explaining
Yes.
it further.
Yep. I believe we've spoken about this before. It's the same challenge in Europe as well. I think everywhere. But I think what people don't realize is within fashion companies, there's different industries, right? Sorry, different departments. So there's
Yes.
IT, there's marketing, there's not just the product developers and the fashion designers. Which department do you enjoy working for the most?
I mean, I love working on all the departments. I have always had a soft spot for design recruiting. I've always loved
Yeah.
that, dealing with creatives, and I feel like I could really relate to them. So I've always really loved
Yeah.
that. I'd say that's probably my favorite department, but I do find myself, I normally fill the most positions just because it's the fastest in marketing,
Yeah.
and in like product. So product development, merchandising, that area.
So, product developers and marketing executives listening, if you want to join a fashion company, we are looking for you.
We always have jobs.
Always product, especially
Always.
merchandising,
Yes.
planning, buying. It's really where it's at. And I think IT, which is strange because IT in itself is, you know, especially at the start of the year, there's a lot of layoffs at big
Mhm.
IT corporations. So a
Oh,
lot of
that's
people are open for
interesting.
work.
Oh.
In Europe, was that the same in the
No,
US?
not necessarily. I would say a lot of layoffs do tend to happen around this time of year, sadly, in the US. Um, I don't know why. Like Spotify just had a huge layoff, like
Yeah,
1,500 people or something, like crazy huge layoff,
yeah,
just last week. I think that December, they're seeing the fiscal year, what it's looking like, and being worried about that. And then probably a lot of it is sadly bonus avoidance, that they'd like to avoid
yeah.
paying out a large bonus.
I'm just really curious. I don't know if you want to discuss this, but have you ever been laid off?
I have not.
Really?
Yeah, luckily, knock on wood, right? Knock
All
on wood.
right,
But
touch wood for you.
uh, yeah, I have never been laid off. I have been around my fair share of layoffs and have had to deal with them, but I have not been laid off. Have you been laid off?
Twice.
Twice?
Twice. I
Oh my
took one for
God.
you.
Oh my God, I didn't know that. Oh
Oh
no.
my God. The reason, well, I got approached by Esprit really randomly. I was laid off before that. I was what I thought it would be my dream company. I was there for 8 months, not too long, but when you're really invested in a company,
Mm-hmm.
mentally, emotionally, physically, I was doing everything. So I was also HR at that company. We didn't have anyone doing it. So it wasn't as developed as your position, because I
Mm-hmm.
had nothing to start with at that company. And you at least have some HR members, me, for example, in Amsterdam, some people
Mm-hmm.
in Germany who were able to give you some sort of guidance, maybe. So that's, yeah, you had a bit of a stepping stone, but you also
A
had to
little bit,
establish
yes.
everything at the
That's
beginning.
crazy. Wow. Oh, I'm so
Yeah.
sorry you've been laid off twice. Oh.
Oh, it's okay. It makes you stronger, right?
It
So,
does. It does.
but just going off this with the layoffs and current trends in the industry, is there something happening in the market in New York in particular or in the US that's like, for example, in Europe, we're getting a lot of ghosting, recruiters ghosting candidates, candidates ghosting us a lot of the times. That seems to be a really big trend. I'm just curious if there's anything particularly in fashion, maybe in New York or in the US in general.
That's definitely a trend I've run into a lot. I have not seen it that much in the last year or so, luckily in New York, but a lot we used to see that. Now I would say there's and understandably there's a really large focus on people looking for their next move, not only a higher salary, but a better work life balance. That's a
Mhm.
really large thing I'm seeing a lot. And in the fashion industry, it's very hard to guarantee because you have
Mm.
crazy deadlines and you work across the globe. So there are extra hours and things like that. But I'd say that's a main thing. And the focus on hybrid work is still
Mm,
huge. You still run into those rare people that want fully remote, but
mm.
I'd say the shift has been everyone wants at least that 1 or 2 days hybrid.
Why do you think so many people are seeking work-life balance?
I think that that was a big shift in COVID is that everyone realized what was important and that work is not number one. Work could be number two or number three. And I think that really changed. And I think that people also noticed that companies were succeeding and people were succeeding even while having that work life balance and working fully remote. And it was extremely different than anything it's ever been. But there's definitely a generational divide, I would say.
Oh, interesting.
So I would say in like the older generations don't don't really understand remote work. Um, and then the younger generations, millennials, Gen Z, are saying that's all I want. All I
Yeah.
want is flexibility. All I want is my life. My job isn't my number one. So there is that difference. Um, and then I think we'll continue to see that divide, unfortunately. There's also a very interesting thing with Gen Z,
Mm,
which I don't know if you recruit a lot of Gen Zers, but it's totally different. Where a lot of people don't want a like a desk job, don't
mm.
want to be in the office. They want to like create their own path, which is amazing and so cool. And I hope that there is that shift, especially in New York. It's possible.
Yeah.
But that's been a big thing. And especially older managers or more seasoned managers will say to me, why can't we get an
Mm.
assistant? And most of the time it's because the recent college grads are not interested in being an assistant.
Yeah, I find that so interesting. In my team, I've got a nice mixture of millennials and Gen Z.
Jay-Z.
Jay-Z, I wish I had Jay-Z in my team. I'm joking. Gen Z people. And that's really interesting because I'm somewhat in the middle with regards to the opinions, and it's really interesting to get the insights, right? So, workcations. Have you heard of this
No.
term? So it's basically being able to work from anywhere as long as it's in that time
Oh,
zone. So my sister, for example, does it a lot. She works from Morocco. She's been in Thailand recently. She's a graphic designer, so she's able to do her projects from anywhere as long as she has internet connection, headphones, Adobe, she's able
amazing.
to do her job. So, for those that are listening who maybe want to relocate to the US, particularly New York, New York is a very desirable area for people in Amsterdam and in Europe in general. Um, if they wanted to have flexibility in the workplace, because Amsterdam is quite flexible, we work either fully remote or 2 or 3 days from the office.
Mhm.
From candidates that you've been talking to and interviewing, is that feasible in New York? Is that something that's happening, or is it quite hard to come by?
It's happening. I think it's happening less in fashion versus other industries. Fully remote does not really seem to be much of a possibility. There are a few people at Esprit that were hired fully remote, but it's proving kind of an issue long term, I think. So we've only been able to hire those fully that are able to come into office. Our companies in 3 days, which is really, really great. And then other teams may have different policies, which we allow, of course.
Yeah.
I think it really depends. Coming from an Amsterdam where you have that kind of flexibility, it's definitely different. There's also a kind of a grind in New York, where you're
Mm.
always kind of working. And New York it's funny because I know everyone's like, it's the best place ever. Oh my God, it's amazing. I grew up here, so I kind of have a different feeling. It's um it's definitely an interesting place to live. It's a great place to grow a career.
Yeah.
But it's a tough place to live and work for sure. So I always want to be honest with anyone that's thinking they want to move to New York. I say it's a little different than when you visit.
But the salaries are, they look amazing in New
They're
York.
great, but versus the cost of living, they are low. Yeah.
Okay. I guess
Yeah,
health
that's the
insurance
problem.
comes in with that cost.
It does. And then just living in New York is really expensive. It's really, really tough and really expensive, especially if
Oh,
you want to
wow.
live in Manhattan or Brooklyn. It's crazy. In some of the other boroughs, or if you want to live in a suburb, it's a little bit more affordable, but it's still probably the most expensive place to live in the US.
Is it the rent or is it like the transportation or groceries? Like what part of it is expensive?
Everything together for sure. The
Oh,
rent is crazy. The rent is really, really high. Um, like my sister lives in a prime area of Manhattan and she has a one bedroom apartment, really beautiful one bedroom apartment. But what she pays is almost double what my husband and I pay for a full house on Staten Island.
oh my
Yeah,
God. And how far is
it's
Staten Island
crazy.
to New York?
Um, it doesn't bother me. I mean, Staten Island is one of the five boroughs, but it
Hmm.
is more suburban. It takes me about an hour 20 minutes to get to the office,
Oh, okay.
depending on the day. It's not horrible, but it's as if someone were commuting from New Jersey or Westchester or Long Island, all of our suburbs, really.
Okay. So if you live outside of the main city area, you could
It's a little
shave
bit
off
more
costs.
affordable.
Okay.
Definitely. It's definitely a little bit more affordable, but I understand if you move to New York for the first time, you want to be
Mm,
in that, you want to
yeah,
be in
in the
that
heart of the
world.
city.
You do. You want to it's definitely a big difference being out here versus when I had lived in Brooklyn and when I had lived in Manhattan.
I was going to say, did you live in the city center
I
before?
did. I
Yeah.
had lived in Manhattan for 3 years, and then I was in Brooklyn for 6 years, and I
Wow.
just moved out here. Yes.
How are you finding it living in the suburbs?
I love it. I'm crazy about it. I like being able to go into the city and then leave. It's great.
Yeah, I live outside of Amsterdam, outside of the ring.
Mhm.
I made the same decision as you. It was so worth it. The rent is cheaper. It's dead quiet. You can't hear the
Great.
tourists or anything. I used to live in the center, and I don't know about New York, but in Amsterdam, the buildings are so fragile. Well, they're quite long, as you know, but they're so old that when it was midnight or it was 1 a.m., 2 a.m., the building would shake because people are riding their bikes, there's Ubers coming past, there's people shouting, smashing bottles,
Like,
like all the tourists, and it's continuous. I don't know about New York, but
that's
Amsterdam is
crazy.
all the time. And I lived on top of a bar and next to a coffee shop. So I was in
Oh
such
my
a
God.
saturated area.
That's so crazy. I've never been to Amsterdam. I really would love to go. But that sounds crazy.
Yeah. And I was
Wow.
an expat as well, living in the UK. And I thought, when you look on Google Maps, you just go in the
Mhm.
middle, and I was like, this is where I'm gonna live. But it was a big mistake. So if I was a candidate and I wanted to move to New York, I wanted to live in the center, ideally. So Brooklyn, let's say, or
Yeah, Brooklyn or Manhattan, probably.
Manhattan.
Mhm.
Manhattan is up my street. Um, how would I don't know if you have you done many relocations with
Not
people?
too many. It's really, really hard to do in the US.
Oh,
Visas are really
okay.
hard to get in the US.
Oh.
So not many.
Why is it so difficult to get visas?
So for most people would have to be employed on an H-1B visa. And
Okay.
an H-1B visa is very hard to obtain. So in order to get it, a company has to even to enter someone into a lottery for it, we have to prove that we could not find that good of a candidate in the US. So we have to do our due diligence and send all the resumes and all the people we had interviewed, and it's really crazy. It's like this large packet.
Wow.
And then if then we could prove it, the candidate could be entered into a lottery. The lottery runs, I think, twice a year, maybe three times a year. And I think about like 5% or 10% from the lottery get in. So it's really, really
What?
tough. Yeah, getting a visa in the US is really hard. And it's pretty rare. So certain
Okay.
industries I think do it a lot. Fashion, not that often. Certain fashion companies
Okay.
definitely do it, but they really need to be able to prove that they couldn't find anyone anywhere else.
Oh, so I can't just go on LinkedIn, search in New York, apply for jobs. It would be very, very difficult.
Sadly, yes, it's really tough. There are other visas too, but they're more like skill specific. So there's something
Yeah.
called an O1 visa, which is just for artists. There are just a few different types, but anyone from Europe or from any of the Asian countries or pretty much anywhere in the world except for I think it's Australia,
Okay.
Canada, Mexico. I think that's it.
Oh, interesting.
Everyone else has to have like a pretty specific visa.
Wow.
From Canada and Mexico and Australia, there are a bit easier of visas that you could get.
Oh, wow. And what if a company was based in New York and you were in an entity in Europe and they wanted you to transfer? Would that be easier if they sponsored you or
I think they'd still have to go through the whole visa
the
lottery.
lottery thing? Really?
Yes,
Oh my
really tough.
God. I can't believe that.
It's crazy. And it's a really expensive visa too.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
How expensive are we talking?
I haven't seen it in about a year at least. It was like at least 10,000 before lawyers' fees.
What?
Yeah. And then you have to pay all these legal fees.
Why? Why has it, do you know why it has become so difficult?
I think the US has kind of always been like this, where it's pretty
Wow.
hard to get visas. I think there was a time in like the 70s or 80s where there were very specific visas for like doctors and things like that, because they
Mm,
were trying to bring in that. So there's a lot more, a lot of amazing immigrants that had gotten visas very young,
yeah.
but now it's really tough.
We relocate people from the US to Amsterdam. I've done a
Oh,
few of those, and it's not too tricky.
what's the process? I'm curious.
So normally the company would sponsor the candidate on a highly skilled migrant visa, and we don't need to like prove that they are the only person in the Netherlands or Europe, which I find easier. We
Hmm.
just have to basically tell the government like what job title they have, why we think they are a high skilled migrant. And normally we've got quite a strong reason because we normally look within Europe. It's easier to
Hmm.
relocate someone.
Of course.
It's not as expensive. I believe it's under 400.
Oh, wow. Oh, it's cheap.
395 or something for the company to sponsor
Wow.
someone.
Easy.
Otherwise, a person can get their own visa, or they can marry a European
Hmm.
person. That's an easy way.
We have that too. Yes.
Just going on the topic of recruitment, and you've been doing this for 12 years now. If you had younger Mel in front of you, and she just started out in the biz and she was saying, "Hey, Melanie, I'm just starting in the recruitment and HR world. What advice do you have for me?" What would you tell her?
I'd say probably the first thing that I would say is recruiting isn't personal. Um, Someone declining an offer or ghosting you or, you know, changing their minds is not your fault. Because I used to, when I was a younger recruiter, I would constantly take it personally and really let it affect my day to day. So I'd say that's the first thing that I would definitely tell myself. And every time I'm training a younger recruiter, that's the first thing I tell them. Don't let it get
Yeah,
to you. It's not you. It's not you. And, a big thing is we're dealing with people. So
yeah,
really just being understanding, understand people. Of course, there are going to be those people that are just not good people and are going to screw you
mm,
over. Absolutely. But overall, people are inherently good. So it's best to give them the benefit of the doubt. Those would be
yeah,
probably my first two big advice things I would tell myself.
yeah. People starting out, and I think even experienced people struggle because they're so empathetic and they want
Yes.
to help people so much. Finding their dream jobs, or if you're corporate, getting into the company in the first place. So
Hmm.
if the candidate just stops replying, or if they're just not interested, or they take a counter offer, oh, I think that's the most painful
Oh,
one.
the counter offer and the stats for a counter offer. They're so bad, and I always explain it, but they never listen.
I'm so happy that you explain it to candidates as well, that taking a counteroffer is never a good idea.
Never.
But they just think it's more comfortable. It's easy. It's what they always wanted. But the fact that you had to resign, find a new job, interview somewhere else for the company to appreciate you.
Exactly. I often find myself also in, where I have been sitting in HR. Even in my last role, I was technically the head of talent, but I sat in HR. I often find myself also explaining it to hiring managers or to higher ups in the company, where sometimes the counteroffer is not the move because the
No.
person's just going to leave.
Yeah.
They're just going to leave, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're retaining them for a long time.
Oh,
And
wow.
they have a lot of trouble understanding that, I think. But certain companies, I get it. If you want to keep someone amazing, let's push. Let's try to fight for them. But if someone's going to leave, they're going to leave. There's not much we could do about it.
It's so refreshing that you're so transparent because I don't think many people are that transparent with the hiring managers. They just sell them the dream, like, I'll find you the right candidate. Don't worry,
Yeah.
leave it with me.
I think it's always important to be transparent, because if you don't want to disappoint, first of all, but also you want
Yeah.
to set the correct expectations. You don't want the hiring manager to go into hiring someone new for their team looking for that old recruiting term, purple unicorn, or, you
Mm.
don't want that. And explaining this is what the market is so that they understand. Because unfortunately, hiring managers will always place the blame on the recruiter. So we need to
Mm.
explain. I always am honest fresh off the bat. Here's the struggles we may have.
On the job intake meeting, right? When you
Yes,
first speak to them.
always. Yeah, when I first speak with them, a lot of times it's salary, or a lot of times it's combining multiple roles in one, where I'm
Oh,
saying
yeah.
those are different. I'm sure you run into that a lot as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I never understand it because particularly if you're in a corporate company and you have the budget and the space to hire multiple people, the manager somehow sometimes doesn't realize that it's
Yeah.
multiple jobs. I find that a lot in IT and marketing
Yes.
specifically.
I see that a lot too. I've seen it a little bit in product, where I've said they're different jobs that we're looking
Yeah.
for. Um, but it really is, if you have a good hiring manager, they're really going to understand. They're going to know it's not an excuse, and it's really for their benefit.
The best hiring managers are the ones that give you full trust and they just
Yes.
listen to you and they say, hey, take this task away from me. I trust you. You're the expert. You know what you're doing. Just help me.
Hmm.
Those are the best hiring managers.
Absolutely, they are.
And yeah, let's not talk about the worst ones. I think we all know.
We all know.
Just revisiting the topic of your younger self, I've trained a few juniors who really, honestly, I think their pain point is the rejections. They hate to call up candidates
Hmm.
and give the bad news. If the role is on hold or it's cancelled, if it's outside of their control, or if they were really set on a candidate and they really, really liked them, and for some reason they interviewed poorly, or the manager just didn't see the qualities within that candidate,
Hmm.
they really, really dislike that. So maybe for those that are listening, and I mean, I struggle with it sometimes if I'm really sold on someone, like super
Oh, me
sold.
too.
I
Hmm.
mean, I've been in the biz for 8 years, you've been in the biz for 12, and we still, I think because we're human, right? We really care about our work. We really find the best people. And it's just about persuading the managers, right? And if they're not convinced, then it breaks your
Absolutely.
heart.
Yeah, it really is. And it's really hard because so often I'm sure we feel very, very confident about someone. We talk to someone, we say,
Mm,
that's the person for the job.
yeah.
But you're right, maybe they interview poorly, or they say just one thing that the hiring manager doesn't like.
Mm,
And we have to just, there's not much we could do. We
yeah.
can't convince them. But yeah, it's very hard not to fall in love with a great candidate.
Yeah. And I don't think people understand how much we do in the background, how much we fight for
Yes.
people sometimes.
Often, very often. And a lot of times it pays off, because a lot of times you'll say, just like how in like outside of work life, you say always go on that second date, right? I always say it
Hmm.
to my sister, my single friends. I'm like, go on a second date. You never know. And same with an interview. If someone was good, but they're not totally sold on them and they're saying, okay, I just want to see more, I say, talk to that person again. Have them
Yeah.
meet another teammate member. Maybe they'll see something else. So that I think is always important. And sometimes they say yes, sometimes they say no, but it is definitely an important thing, I think.
It's crazy to think a 1 hour virtual call with someone is enough for someone to make a decision.
Never is. Never is.
I will never understand. There's some companies or some teams that work fully remote sometimes, and I'm such a people person. I would love to meet like all my candidates, or particularly if it's for my team, to
Oh,
meet them
yes.
face to face, to get a feel of who they are, get their energy, see how
Hmm.
they compose themselves, just understand them as a human being in general. So interviewing someone fully remote, fully virtually the whole time and then hiring them.
I agree because you don't know until that person is in front of you. It could be completely different, completely different.
Have you seen like the metaverse hiring?
I have not.
I'm not really technical, so I'm going to try and explain it. It's basically like this, like the headset
Yeah, like a
thing.
virtual reality headset.
Yeah,
Okay.
and then they've been testing it for interviews, that you can really almost have the person sitting in the room, and apparently you can see micro expressions, twitches, hair movements, hands, like their entire body. So it feels like they're really in the room with you, and they think this is
That's
the future of
crazy.
recruiting.
I don't know. Could you see that being adopted? Could you see your hiring manager sitting there with these like big goggles on? I don't know about that.
I think in tech companies, yeah. I think if they have a lot of
Yes.
remote people, they will want
Yes.
to.
I could see it there. There's some industries like I'd say like fashion that are a bit behind. And
Yeah.
a bit in a different century. So maybe if tech companies adopt that in the next 5, 10 years, fashion will do it in 20.
Fashion is a bit difficult because with the prototypes, samples, feeling the
Mhm.
fabrics, going to suppliers,
Absolutely.
I don't know how you would do that digitally.
I don't really understand it. A big thing I say in design too is a lot of design teams, they like doing virtual. And I say, don't you want to like touch the portfolio? Don't
Yeah.
you want to like see the fabrics, especially if it's someone that's focused on knitwear or a
Yeah.
certain category? Don't you want to see what they actually view? And maybe that's old school in me, where I'm like, well, that's what I always did. I would physically look at a candidate's portfolio,
Yeah.
and now everything's digital. But it is really interesting that they're very focused on in-person work, but an interview sometimes not so much.
Oh, wow. I find that so strange. I don't
It
think it's old
is.
school. I think it just makes sense.
Totally. I feel like you want to actually touch the product.
No, if you are
Yeah,
passionate about that, if you are like a knitwear specialist or a denim specialist, you have to. I think I would even want to during the interview, like
yeah,
just see some of the products and see what you're working with, because otherwise you're going in blind, right?
absolutely. Yeah, that's why a lot of our design teams, sometimes as a final interview, when someone's in the office, they'll show them the samples, tour them around
Mm.
a little bit, because
Oh,
it's one thing
good.
to see the product in the store, but
Yeah.
it's another thing to see our upcoming product and what we have in
Mm.
mind, especially as our brand is evolving. It's
Yeah.
really cool and interesting and helpful to see.
Yeah, because normally the products in the store are, yeah, the final
Mhm.
materials and everything. So they need to see the lead up to it as
Absolutely.
well. The
Yeah.
experiments that we've had
Hmm.
to endure before the final product hits the shelves. And of course, like you said,
Yes.
all the seasonal stuff. I think it's really interesting that we work, is it 6 months in advance?
Think it might even be close to a year. It might be because I
It's
think they're doing
crazy.
Q4 product review right now. So for next year, it's crazy to
Wow.
think ahead like that. I know.
How can you even, I don't know what I'm going to wear next summer
I
at the
know.
beach. I have no idea.
I know. It's crazy. It
It must
is.
be really stressful then, maybe for people listening, thinking of getting into the fashion industry. it's stressful, right? To come up with concepts. I mean, fashion designer is this title that a lot of young people aspire to be because they're creative. They
Hmm.
may be sketching their notepads, some styles, or they follow a lot of fashion TikTokers and think, wow, I want to live like that. But it's high stress, isn't it? It's lots of pressure to deliver, to have really high standards, great designs.
It is, I think there are different areas in the industry. So I think our company is very creative, which is amazing. They focus on hand sketches. They want a truly like talented creative designer. And not to say that other companies don't, but the company I was at in the past, they would do a lot of sample shopping, and they would go travel Europe and shop the cool brands and come back and kind of knock them off. So it kind of
Oh,
takes out the creativity, which I think a lot of brands do. Our brand absolutely does not do that by any means.
yeah,
So they are really focused um, on actually designing and being
yeah.
creative. So I'm sure that could be stressful, and I'm sure similar to recruiting, you have to take your ego out of it and realize that your
Mm.
idea is not the problem or anything like that.
Oh,
It's
so
very
difficult.
interesting. I can't even imagine doing it.
I have two friends and my sister who are very close to me, all designers, two for
That's amazing.
beauty and one for a lifestyle brand. Yeah, you have to really disassociate because you
Mhm.
are this creative individual, aren't you? That you have this style, you are interested in specific things, and then you have a director telling you what to do, essentially.
Definitely.
So you need to be
Yeah.
patient,
Hmm.
resilient as well,
Yes.
and really creative, but also not conform. What word am I looking for? Also adapt to
Yeah,
the
adaptable for
company's
sure.
style
Yes,
as well.
definitely.
Um, you mentioned earlier about portfolios. I love looking at portfolios
It's the best. It's
for
the best part
creative
of the job,
people.
I think.
Yeah.
Looking at that and really being able to see their creative process. And it's really amazing. There have been a few times where I've actually been a part of like portfolio review for college seniors. So
Oh, no way.
I've done it with a few local schools, like really good design schools. And it's really amazing to see the process of these young designers and see what's probably our future of fashion. Just amazing designers, beautiful work, and then really get
Yeah.
to see their stories and their ideas. It's really amazing to see.
Are there some at that college university that you think like, wow, this is going to be the next Karl
Oh yeah.
Lagerfeld or the next Vivienne Westwood or
There are some that are so incredible. There are two, I remember doing this. I'd done it in May of last year, right before I came to ESPRIT. And there were two projects I remember, and I looked at probably 100 that day. But
yeah,
there were two that really stood out that I was like, not only do I want to shop this, but I really am like, when you open up your company, let me know. Like, I'm like,
yeah.
it's that good. And that they're just really talented. They're amazing.
Do you still keep in touch with them?
I've contacted them, especially when we've had assistant designer openings. They're
Just
really
waiting for your store
amazing.
to open.
Yeah, I'm like, hello, what are you doing? But it's really cool to see. And I think a few of them try to do their own thing at first if you have the financial backing to do so.
Yeah.
They really try to do that and they push to do it. And it's really very, very cool.
And you mentioned 100 portfolios in a day. I've been there. It's painful. I've done that. It's
It's
so much
crazy.
work. People don't understand. So when you apply for a graphic designer position, a product designer position, or packaging designer specifically,
Mhm.
um, it's so many people that apply for the same role.
So many.
And you all have different skills and different
Hmm.
ideas. How do you assess? I'm just going to pick your brain a bit because I have my
Yeah.
own method. Okay, I'm a candidate. I'm a senior designer for denim, for example. I
Hmm.
design everything denim. And you have a position for a senior designer denim in New York. And I'm based somewhere else in the US and I just want to live in New York. And you have 100 applicants. I want to stand out. How do I stand out to you? What do you look for?
I would say the first thing I'm looking for in a portfolio is knowing my brand and knowing what we look for is how does your work relate to our brand? And of course, there are highly adaptable designers, but really seeing those that kind of have that same similar commercial appeal, I would say. So those
Okay.
that can really do that, that's the first thing. And I think a cohesive portfolio is the first thing I look at. It's very easy for me to say no to someone that their portfolio is a mess and they don't have any of their recent work, or
Ah, so
because
disorganized
yeah, really
portfolio. Okay.
disorganized. I would say if you're a senior designer, we don't want to see your work from college. Your college BFA
Yeah.
portfolio is not relevant to what we have now. I'm sure it's awesome, but it's not relevant. We want to see,
Yeah.
what have you been doing professionally?
Yeah.
And sometimes I'll have the conversation. If the resume is good enough, I'll say,
Yeah.
I'll talk to them anyway. And then I tell them on the call, we need to actually see your current work.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say the main thing I'm looking for is really aesthetic, if it
Yeah.
speaks to the brand.
Do you want it close to the brand or a little bit off edge?
Yeah, I'd like it similar to the brand, not exact.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times in design, especially at a senior level, you're going to do a project. So that's
Yeah.
when we'll really, really see how you can design into the brand. But the project is going to be a final step. So, the first thing you want to see, if you created, a lot of times I get projects where, or I get portfolios where someone did a quick few sketches for what they would have pitched for ESPRIT. And that's really
I
helpful
was
to
gonna
see.
ask you, oh, do you like that? I
I
thought it was
I actually like
really,
that.
oh, when I worked at Gizu, for example, the person I hired in the end, I looked at hundreds of portfolios and now she's like my best friend. Um, but what stood out, because the others were trying to like create campaigns for us almost as like one of their projects on the
Uh,
portfolios. I don't know why I didn't like that.
if they do it well, I like it. Yeah, if I like it if they do well. If they totally are off base, that immediately
Yeah,
cancels them
it just
out.
shows you.
As long as you have the knowledge, and a big thing with all positions is knowing the brand. I'm
Yeah.
sure you have this a lot. I can't tell you how many calls a week I have where the person has no idea about a spray.
Someone asked me once if it was an IT company.
Oh my God.
I was like, why didn't you Google us on the call?
It's
That's what I
so
would do.
easy. Exactly. It's so easy. Just look it up. It's so easy. And especially there's so much information out there about a spree that
Yeah.
it's pretty impossible not to know about it.
As a tip, maybe basic interview etiquette. Just Google us. Not us. Just Google the company.
Just Google.
Search it on Instagram, LinkedIn, everything.
Look into the company you're interviewing for, no matter what.
I can't believe that's happened to both of us.
It's so crazy. It happens so often.
I think we've given quite a lot of advice. So about
I think
portfolios
so.
specifically, interview etiquette. Is there anything else? Because fashion is quite competitive. New York is competitive, for example.
Mhm.
Anything that stands out to you in an application or a candidate in general?
Not necessarily. I would say if you've worked for, I mean, I think trying to get into not only like the top brands, but trying to get into up and coming brands and learn different things around there is very helpful. Um, that's a really big thing. And then if someone's a new grad or first breaking into fashion from a different industry, intern. I know it sucks. You're
Yes.
not going to make any money, but no one is looking at an assistant level person who all they have on their resume is that they were like the president of their fashion club at school or something.
I'm so glad you said that. Same for me. Intern is how
Yes,
you get your foot in the door.
absolutely. And sometimes you get a job from that internship, but other
Oh,
times
yeah.
it opens the door, and that's all that matters.
Melanie, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for it's been
Thank
so
you.
valuable. All the information about living in New York, in the US, the regulations, fashion, everything. Thank you so, so much.
Thank
How
you.
can people find you if they want to contact Melanie at Esprit?
Yeah, I would say definitely my LinkedIn. Contact me there. And then I tried to respond to as many messages as possible, but definitely add me on LinkedIn and send me a message and take a look at our job board. If there's anything exciting, we'll definitely talk about it.
Mel, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Thank you, listeners, for listening to Talent Exchange, and we'll see you next time.